Marius said, the problem with retrospect is that when you are employing it, you must take a leap of faith and believe you have it. Sandy added, the tomorrow you worried about yesterday is today. A look was exchanged between the cell traders and Sandy that both Cheesy and I noticed, but said nothing as Marius continued, yes, very much so. At any rate, if you could close your eyes and look down on the Salton Sea 50 years from now, what would it look like? Marion added, that's where it will go after everyone gets through pushing it in the direction they want it to go. The Salton Sea pendulum has already begun swinging just by our being here. Sandy noted, too far in the future and there may be nothing here to see. A wasted journey or a warning. And I added, this may be a coastline to the Pacific if Senior San Andres finds fault with what happens here. Cheesy asked, computers are about logic and my computer wants to know how you can avoid the principle of causality that says an effect cannot occur before its cause. Marius noted, since ancient times, precognition has been associated with trance and dream states, one voluntary, one involuntary. You know our sister Darla. She can use skills of prophecy, fortune-telling, second sight, and waking premonitions to entertain our circus clients. Cheesy said, sometimes instances of the future appear in your dreams. Perhaps Cthulhu has been talking to Ngai and sending us messages from our ancestors. I guess that's only for Kikuyu or perhaps just someone with enough vital force. I added, Aristotle believed most so-called prophetic dreams were mere coincidences. He said that if you were receiving messages in your dreams, it was more likely you were reaching forward rather than reaching back. I think he was just pissed off after a bad night at the roulette table. Marius recalled a book from home and recanted the story to us. I read a book from our library that was published by a missionary named Friar P. Boylat in the late 1800s, but I'm not sure where his travels took him. Boylat asked an unspoken question to an African witch doctor he mistrusted, and the witch doctor gave him the correct answer without ever having heard the question. I said, information passing backwards in time needs to be carried by physical particles going back in time. High-energy physics says that can't happen, to which Marius replied, do you still need a telephone wire to make a phone call? Another epiphany, I thought. Future sight travels on the ether or vital force. If you see the future, how could you change it? Would it spoil the journey? Precognition contradicts most neuroscience from electrophysiology to neuroimaging. New discoveries like quantum retrocausality might suggest a possible mechanism for recognition. I thought perhaps this would be something Drive. Emily might be interested in. Marion added, our sisters Krista and Magna have trained to conjure up false memories of visions that occurred before the actual event, plant thoughts so that people think it was their idea or do a little after the fact matchmaking. If you plant the idea and wait long enough, they will make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sometimes it requires a smell to accompany the suggestion. The girls are also trained in hypnotic effects so their idea can quickly become your idea. If you ever meet our sisters, I will have to teach you how to block hypnosis or they may have their way with you. Sandy said, sages from the past like Nostradamus benefit from self-fulfilling prophecies, because most of his predictions need some supporting nudges. A ruler born near Italy. Could be Napoleon, Ferdinand II, Hitler or no one, take your pick. Marius added, there are many cultures today and over the centuries around the world where people believed they or someone else had the gift of foresight. Shamans in the Amazon claim they can experience these journeys like the Aztecs, Mayans, Incas and even across continents to Africa and Asia. India probably has dozens of mystics and fakirs who claim they can. Remote thinking. Marion added, don't rule out potions and plant extracts because that's what they would be using. Possible transportation of your mind to another state. That's interesting because that mind could be placed in another vessel such as an animal. Cheesy added, like the time I fell down the stairs on a visit to Castle Seltradet to see you guys in Moldavia. And I said, tell us. Quote, I was coming out of the third-floor library on my way down the stairs, so I was reading a book as I went. Just as I got to the top of a 10-meter stone staircase the friggin' cat walked right in front of me. To which Marius and Marion both cheered, Mr. Whiskers. I did a front roll down 32 stone stairs, hitting the wall, the railing and every friggin' stair. When I hit the bottom, I simply stood up and still had my book in my hand. Not a bruise on me. At this point Marius and Marion were killing themselves laughing. Then Marius said, and who was there to dust you off? To which Cheesy replied, Darla. Marion said, that's the tumbling stair spell. It's a planted suggestion. She was probably planning that for weeks. She likes you, Gordon. We left it there for the time being and continued to consider our real estate choices. Of course, there are principles of urban development such as ribbon development with anchor stores, industrial parks with vertical marketing, car malls, malls of America, or even the big box store malls all located together. The retail aspect of people outfitting homes, working, eating, shopping, was mind-boggling. Those considerations will be for people with those skills and probably known to Grandfather Wadden. We're just working on our perceptions of the future Salton Sea world we want to see. Penn Phillips was only getting started on his grand design, so the area of Bombay Beach was relatively small when you look at the entire circumference of the lake and how much land is in the Salton Trough area. What were his ideas for the rest? Was he a visionary or just a big loser with too much money? I don't know why I thought of Roly-Poly Prince Albert at that moment. Sandy informed us, "We're only at the end of the trough here, there is nothing but desert for miles all along where the canal is being planned from the Mexican border to here. The Mexican side has no development either, and there may not be as many ready investors there as there are on the American side. Especially with the backing of Dick's father, grandfather and all his cronies, not to mention their business associates, relatives and other politicians and for that matter military. Even if this place doesn't go, it's almost a pyramid scheme of real estate with so many people ready to buy in when the news comes out. Thank goodness we're the first buyers the others will be buying from. It seems like all of Highway 111 was built at the 200-foot level, so the berm will always be to the left of it on the eastern shore. I have to switch between meters and feet, Fahrenheit and Celsius here in the US. That would leave all of the land between Highway 111 and the berm potential target real estate protected by the berm. Far too much real estate is available for us to buy even at desert distress prices, so picking the prime will be important. I talked to Carl on the phone, and we went over these strategies. His concerns were about where things would be built and the laws in the United States regarding construction, real estate, taxes and more. I think I would call Carl a worrywart, but that would probably stress him. I told him Uncle Sandhu was also looking into business opportunities for the cell traders and maybe he would be a valuable source of information. Bombay Beach is directly across the water from Salton City and they're about halfway down each side of the sea. East side, west side. To call Salton City a city is a bit futuristic even for Penn the developer. A huge development 50 times the size of Bombay Beach with streets laid out in groups and circular patterns is a huge white elephant. Carl advised me to only consider things above the 100-foot mark above lake level because anything less might have to be filled in to shore up the berm. That land would be expropriated by some level of American government for potentially less than cost. If the people are capitalists, then the government are probably super capitalists. Cheesy suggested. Turning left off Highway 111 onto Pope Street, we approached Bombay Beach for the first time. The streets were laid out in an 8x4 grid pattern with the front 2 rows twice the size of the last 2 rows. 5th Street had the vista view of the Salton Sea and the streets counted backwards to where we came in. Horizontally, the streets were named Avenue A through to H and the outside street with the vista view was named Avenue of Palms. I thought it would be nice to see palm trees along this stretch someday, especially under streetlights. The corner of 5th Street and Avenue of Palms should be a prestigious address someday. Maybe we can sell Donald Trump a tower location. There is real estate between 5th Avenue and the sea, but it was empty and hopefully the berm will take that up. Just to be on the safe side, both sides of the street should be purchased at least for the units facing 5th Street. So, we started looking at the businesses that were there and phoning information to Carl. The Seaside Baptist Church was the only structure in the corner square. Moving back toward Pope, the next square had a government building for particulate research, then it's 2 or 3 more streets before you hit the Bombay Beach Opera Club, which was closed and abandoned. Other than that, some structures, sheds, RVs, and lots of desert. We thought we could buy the whole block and that's what we asked Carl to consider. He laughed and said he will see what he can do, but was glad we were so excited by what we saw. As we drove through the streets weaving our way back to Pope and then Highway 111, everything seemed post-apocalyptic or even Mad Max. We drove along the eastern shore where Highway 111 runs at the 200-foot mark. At this point the locals, the few that there are, call it Grapefruit Boulevard. All the land to the west of Highway 111 down to the sea was available, but some will be taken in to form the berm. Grapefruit Boulevard stretches 12 km along the coast and the distance to the sea is just over a kilometer. It would make a terrific housing development if you could sit on it for 10 years. Or perhaps even a golf course or 3. Every property seemed to offer countless opportunities. At the end of the Grapefruit Boulevard was Salt Creek. The Salt Creek area was below the 200-foot mark, but above the 100-foot level, so it may be safe or at least salvageable. The same goes for the North Shore Airport. At less than 200 feet, the airport didn't look like it would represent too much of a loss. The other occupant of the North Shore was the reservation. We turned south along the western shore on Highway 86 until we reached the Desert Shores. Desert Shores was a grid about the same size as the Bombay Beach site, but it was residential and partially inhabited even then. In that area we focused only on the frontage to the sea at 100 or more feet. It seemed a bit confusing to be talking in feet, but in the United States, everything was based on the imperial system. This area is going to need the berm to be shored up on both sides. Holt Avenue, Cowell Avenue and Eddy Avenue were all the vista views, but if we could stand on the shore now, where is the shore when 7 times the water fills the sea? Salton Sea Beach Marina was located in this area, but it was risky getting closer to the shore because of the berm requirements and possibly some government usage in this area. Next on our road trip was the Red Earth Casino, which stood on a site by itself. The cell traders had to get out and look around, but the streets were unoccupied except for a convenience store. We didn't stay long because there was nothing to see and we continued on to Salton City. The whole city was laid out with streets, sewers, lights and absolutely nobody in it. The massive size of the project took our breath away. All the streets were empty lots except in one of the satellite cities that ran off Treadwell where a small population of people lived, but it wasn't full by any stretch of the imagination. There's just too much real estate here to consider. From Salton City we headed south again to where the Imperial Valley was beginning to encroach on the sink. There's definitely an appetite for irrigated land in this part of the world because it just keeps growing like a giant caterpillar if you view it by satellite. We had circumnavigated the sea and decided to head back to Bombay Beach to find a vacant lot where we could set up camp. There was no one around to kick us out and it was unlikely anyone would care enough with a million other places they could go. Marius suggested, let's spend the night at the corner of 5th Street and Avenue of the Palms and enjoy the view that we will someday sell to Mr. Trump. We headed over with the RVs and parked them at right angles to provide a protected view of the sea. Scavenging for firewood, we set up our camp overlooking the Salton Sea from what was going to be the best address on the strip. To celebrate, the Jacks brought out some toys from the RV, 2 whips and a practice ball thrower from their act. It was a smaller version of the one I saw them use at the circus. Everyone sat around the fire in the pitch dark and watched Marius pull out his whip and walk to one side of the ball thrower. Marion took a position on the other side and said, this unit only throws 2 colors and 1 size. He threw Cheesy a remote control and told him to set it to 10-second intervals and 5 minutes for 2 players. You say go Cheesy. The rest of us cheered him on or engaged in some goading and perhaps trash talk. Cheesy said, go, and pressed the button. The balls started popping out of the machine and were thrown about 5 meters in the air. Marius snapped his whip and took out the first one. Our American friends had never seen such a thing and were gobsmacked. When they recovered, they stood up and cheered with glee. A blue one came out and Marius snapped his whip to tie the score. Crack, pop, crack as one ball after another came out. As the score changed everyone started cheering and hollering. With a minute left Marius had a 2-point lead, so it was really exciting when they got to the last 10 seconds with only 1 point between them. I thought they were planning a tie, but Marius didn't miss any and unfortunately Marion was distracted by a moth which flew in his face. A cheer went up from the crowd as the event ended. If any of the Americans ever saw the Jacks in their environment, they would be amazed and would have to find another word for awesome. The Jacks passed their whips around and let Dick and Cheesy have a match with the winner to play Lance. The tournament lasted all night and if anyone was on the sea that night, they certainly knew we were there. What they might not have known was that we were going to stay and this place was not going to be the same. The sea actually looked nice with the desert moon shining down on it and being reflected back, but the smell was foul during the day but less at night. That was temporary, I hoped. In the morning, sitting around the fire with our coffee, Rick gave us a little more insight into the history of the area. For thousands of years, the river has alternately flowed into the valley, or diverted around it, creating either a saline lake called Lake Cowell or a dry desert basin, respectively. The lake has dried up completely in the past as it did around 400 years ago. Hundreds of archaeological sites were found during these periods of drought. Perhaps every 400 years this area offered an amazing habitat for the humans of the day. Wave-cut shorelines at various elevations record a repeated cycle of filling and drying over hundreds of thousands of years. Lake Cowell, as the Salton Sink area was known, once covered over 2,000 square miles or 6 times the area of the Salton Sea. Marius said, there could be sites visible just 10 feet below the surface. The water is actually pretty clear. Cheesy told him, I'm not going in there. Marion piped in, let's get some canoes. And he and Lance took a trip into the Walmart on bicycle and got him to deliver 4 fiberglass canoes and the required life jackets to our camp. The salesman thought they were nuts, but when Marius paid in cash and gave him a tip, he changed his mind and sent him out later the same day. Several of us took the canoes out on the sea and paddled about looking deep into the water but found nothing in the immediate area around our camp, but this was a big lake even though it seemed to be breathing its last breath. Of course, when it came time to turn around and return to camp, Marion and Cheesy could not help but make a race of it. Lance was able to keep up with them once he realized it was a race, but Cheesy and Marion had the drop on him because they had the idea first. As they got closer to shore, the group gathered to cheer him on: Marius, Sandy, Rick and Rowdy. Lance was gaining on him in the end, but Marius was able to beat Cheesy in the final stretch. There were 2 or 3 more races along the coast before sunset and the big barbecue we were having for dinner. Everyone was getting comfortable with the desert life and sitting around the fire at night under an unbelievable sky where so many things were moving about. Many times, the conversation came back to the Jacks. Cheesy informed us that if we wanted to buy a Jack in the Box franchise, it would cost us $50,000 for the franchise fee, and we would have to pay the corporation 5% of our gross sales and contribute another 5% of gross sales to an ongoing marketing fund. They should be paying the one-eyed Jacks the marketing money. I added, if you want to open one, you'll spend about $2.5 million to get up and running, according to Carl. Jack appealed to me with his ping-pong ball-like head, yellow clown cap, beautiful blue eyes, pointy black nose, and that red smile that warms the cockles of your heart. He's always dressed nicely in a well-pressed business suit. Ever since he confidently marched back into his office building to reclaim his rightful role as founder and CEO by activating a detonation device and exploding in a shower of smoke, wood, and paper. Jack's back. Cheesy was getting to be an aficionado on the genre and would say things like, "I love the junk in the box" ads. Some guy gets pissed off at Jack and yells at him, "Beat it, clown." So, Jack chases him down and finally tackles him to the ground, forces him to eat some food and makes him confess with a mouthful of food. Jack gets pissed because he gets grass stains on his business suit. He said there were great campaigns like the Spicy Crispy Girls selling chicken, but our favorite was the Meaty Cheesy Boys, a boy band selling the ultimate cheeseburger promoted by an ad campaign featuring an out-of-control advertising executive previously fired by Jack. Then there was one where a medical doctor made claims that fast food could cure baldness, help trim extra pounds, and remove wrinkles. Jack asks, "Where did you find this guy?" The ad exec proudly responded, "Our tobacco company." Cheesy had purchased a bag of 50 baseball-sized white balls of biodegradable material and drew various Jack faces on them. With some tomato cages and a pair of wire cutters, we found new Jack heads every day. They had an ad where a man washed up on a remote island with only a Jack in the Box antenna ball as company. In Cheesy's version, the antenna ball fights Tom Hanks' ball Wilson and lets the air out of him. The final scene shows Tom Hanks wearing Jack on a rope around his neck, upside down like he's a trophy. But the news was not always good for Jack in the Box. In the beginning they suffered a crisis involving E. coli bacteria. 4 children died of hemolytic uremic syndrome and 600 other customers became sick after eating undercooked patties contaminated with fecal material. The chain quickly settled lawsuits but were nearly bankrupt and hemorrhaging customers to the other burger chains. That's a comeback twist worthy of M. Nightmare Shyamalan. The next day we decided to take a tour of Palm Desert and Desert Springs. The Jacks were working on plans with Uncle Sandu, and Sandy wanted to stay and make a call to Sir Malcolm. The cell traders, Sandy and Rick, decided to stay in camp and take care of some business while the rest of us piled into one RV and left the other one at the campsite. Palm Springs and Palm Desert were nestled between the elbows of the mountains, so they offered all kinds of environments, terrains, and beautiful vistas to enjoy. Palm Desert had some of the swankiest country clubs, golf courses and exclusive shopping areas I had ever seen, but the boys were from the Riviera and were less impressed. The shops on El Paseo featured designer boutiques intermingled with restaurants and art galleries which Marius said reminded him of France. The Jacks interacted with any and all of the live entertainment they encountered in the warm desert sun plying their trade. Buskers were playing music, performing comedy skits, and dancing up and down stairways, escalators, and fountains. Cheesy asked, "Where are the mimes?" "There have to be mimes. What a place to retire to if you could afford it." Palm Springs was a little different, as we found out. It was all about hot springs with hotels, golf courses and spas which were all connected or interconnected. The shopping on Palm Canyon Drive serviced the wealthy patrons with shops and boutiques and a big wet dash of bootlicking. The desert ends at hills and valleys where the vegetation makes it great for hiking, biking and horseback trails, but as usual, the beauty comes with a beast, the venomous rattlesnake. There are areas like this in the sink which are back from the sea. Some of the most prestigious addresses in Los Angeles are the hills as well. However, they're generally not the first to sell. Powering all of this personal pampering requires a lot of energy. Geothermal energy is no stranger to the Salton Sea, and through geothermal production you have the added ability to extract lithium and silica. Lithium is crucial in the development of rechargeable batteries used to power electronic devices including vehicles. Extracting lithium from geothermal brine in geothermal production is reputed to be eco-friendly. Silica can be added to so many products to make those products better. Geothermal fields generate electric power and in the process pump brine water from underground to surface ponds. Evaporation removes most of the water, quickly leaving silica waste as the residual product. Some types of geothermal production processes inject water into the ground like fracking for oil and can have significant impact on the underground geology in that area of the continent. Even though he was an oil man, Dig didn't have nice things to say about fracking. Dig got the great idea for us all to get bikes when we were in Palm Springs looking at all the trails. We decided to go back to the Walmart and buy a bunch of ready-built bikes. It only took an hour, and we were loading 9 bikes of varying description, color, size and quality into the RV. Lance and Rick decided to ride back to camp on 2 of the bikes. We tried to get the same helmets as a joke, but unfortunately, they didn't have that many of one type. Our camp was starting to look bigger and better every day. The RVs were now parked in more permanent locations blocking out the sun. We had a campfire with lots of seating, a food area, viewing areas to look out over the sea and a rock-built bicycle rack. Several tarps stretched out provided shade during the day and helped funnel the wind where we wanted it. Channeling the wind was Marius' idea, and he brilliantly arranged the tarps so they would keep a constant breeze blowing through the camp all day long. The rest of the area around us would be calm, and yet you could see Cheesy's hair blowing in the wind inside the camp. At night he would move one tarp and the whole wind movement within the camp would change. Sandy, Dick and Marion were sleeping outside at night in hammocks they had constructed. Cheesy told us, "The Jack in the Box Corporation is a lot like its own character, Jack." Listen to this. A state tax dispute shut the chain down for several days due to unpaid taxes. Then in another article they're accused of selling horse meat at their international locations, but they don't even have any international locations, they only operate in the United States. Somebody is after these guys. I added, Jack is really misunderstood. He's portrayed as a cunning, evil, lustful, and manipulative bastard. Misogynistic by nature, oppressive, arrogant, and exceedingly cruel. I thought if we need anyone to portray Jack in a movie, then Ian's brother Richard would be perfect. In his defense, Marion said, Jack is known to be a highly competitive and pugnacious fighter, especially when challenging the tin soldier in a violent struggle with that massive sword of his. Marius added, there's a Jack's secret menu for fans in the know. If you want a particular menu item made a certain way, all you have to do is ask, any time of day. Know the secret words and get the secret meal or whatever else may be in the box. Dick told us, there's more than 2,200 locations in the United States, but almost half are in California and half of the rest are in Texas. I love these places. Every day Carl called with more updates and closings on pieces of property. The count was 9 now and we had hardly put a dent in the fund. Sandy came to Dick, Cheesy and I with a plan. He knew that we were buying land for investment, but if he were to purchase a home for himself, he would want to have his house near the Sunny Bono Bird Sanctuary bordering the Imperial National Wildlife Refuge. He found a piece of property that bordered the sanctuary completely and extended out into the desert towards Bombay Beach, but about 6 kilometers down the eastern shore. We rode the bikes down the next day to get a look at the site he had chosen and saw some incredible birds and vistas over the wetlands, even with the sea in the state that it was in. If it looked this good at its lowest ebb, then what was the upside potential? Dick was the only one who had to check his finances, so he said he was in if Carl could make it work for him. Cheesy had enough personal money for this type of venture and Carl told me I was good to go. Cheesy was now in California and not on the Riviera. He'd already been to Atlantic City, so now he had Las Vegas to visit as well, an array of new casinos that didn't know him. In this part of the world, he'll not be without funds when and if he needs them. These casinos had no idea Corridon Zola was in town. The temperature had been sweltering and the sun blistering, so we constructed a large area under a new tarpaulin Dick picked up. If things got really bad, then cooling off in the RVs was always an option. On the bike rides a hat was a must, as was water and places to nip into the shade. Evening rides were popular and we did run into other campers who were even more eccentric than us. The heat made me think that if there are lots of people living here, then they're going to require a lot of electricity. In the desert you don't have hydro dams, being below sea level doesn't let a lot of wind blow by, but you do have an abundance of sun. A solar farm could turn sunlight into hydro into money. Why not? I'll have to find out why not and at least go solar when we live here. Several people had arrived in camp in the last couple of days. They were relatives of the cell traders and performers in the circus who had arrived to work with Marion and Marius for a couple of months. A couple of cases of equipment arrived with them, which included equipment which could be used for climbing. This gave Lance, Dick, Marius, and Marion an opportunity to climb some cliffs, so they rode out on the bikes and found several areas they liked to climb. Marius told Cheesy, on one climbing trip I saw the entrance to cave, but it was out of reach from where I was. The next time we went back to that location I couldn't find it. I began to think that perhaps it was an illusion created by shadows being cast as the sun changed its direction over the course of the day. However, I went back with Lance one day at a totally different time of day and he saw it as well, but again we couldn't reach it. Lance is an avid climber, so he bought the property below the cliff. I had Uncle Sandu pick me up the one beside it, and I think I might throw a tent up there. Where there's one cave, there may be others. On our last night at the Salton Sea, we sat around the fire and looked up at the desert sky with more stars than anywhere I had seen with the exception of Africa. With no background light anywhere, the stars seemed to pop out of the sky. The sky was active here with multiple shooting stars and so many satellites I thought it was an invasion force. How many of those were UFOs? Once the development puts the lights on in the sink, this sky will disappear. The Sell-Traded brothers decided to stay at Bombay Beach and live on one of the properties we bought with the 2 RVs. They had arranged with Dick to take over the financing on the RVs and planned to anchor them down. It was the perfect spot to work on their act and build some new content. The desert seemed to agree with them, and they wanted to take advantage of it as well as have a break. Las Vegas was only 6 hours away, so they decided to purchase some motorcycles to go with the RVs and bikes. Marius and Marian loved the isolation and the crazy antics of the people they met in this environment. Uncle Sandu was expected to join him for a few months or as long as tourist visas last. If all else fails, they will enroll as students somewhere. Cheesy was going to see about transferring from MIT to one of the California schools like the University of Southern California, Berkeley, or UCLA. The Jacks and Cheesy went motorcycle shopping after we left. The rest of us had to rejoin the world and Dick and the boys had to rejoin the cadets. I returned to Oxford and found the house in great shape. Errol had made a few improvements that were on our wish list, so it made it easy to settle into the school routine. To achieve my school goals, I had to earn a bachelor's degree in biological science first. Programs in that area concentrated on cell and molecular biology. It's supposed to take 4 years for an undergraduate degree and both Errol and I are in our second year. Many of our courses are the same, but we do have some elective differences. I wanted to focus on genetic materials rather than general science. There are lots of interesting courses coming up this semester and throughout the curriculum including organic chemistry, cell biology, structural biochemistry, evolutionary biology and molecular genetics. I sure could use some tutoring from Dr. Sue and Dr. Ben. After that I'll have to get a graduate degree with a specialization in biological science. In that degree program I should learn about genetic systems analysis, microbiology, medical anthropology, evolutionary genetics, and human disease modeling. Errol and I both wanted to learn about CRISPR as well. The CRISPR immune system works to protect bacteria from repeated viral attack. It could be the key to the devil's pendulum. Going to school seems like a way of life to me. Many of my acquaintances at this school are anxious to get out in the workplace and get on with their lives. I still have 5 or 6 years of education left. Either I'm a patient person or being independently wealthy provides one with the patience required. Errol said his mom Mary was doing well. Now that she only had Errol's tuition to worry about, she and Uncle Artis moved into a new place that's closer to the cannery and has better access to her bar job near the center of Hobart. A trip home is still not in the cards for another year. I received a call from Ian in late November informing me that Sir Malcolm had passed away and he gave me details of the funeral. Sir Malcolm was going to be cremated, but there was still a ceremony for his English family. He recounted the story of Sir Malcolm's last night as told to him by Sandy. According to Sandy, Sir Malcolm seemed agitated most of the day by things that would not normally bother him. He was just not his normal self. The evening meal was consumed in silence and then he went directly to his bungalow, sat at the floor cross-legged and went into a meditative state. When I checked on him before I retired, he was still in the same position. I placed my hand on his shoulder and he was ice cold. Waking him just enough to move him to his bed, I covered him in blankets. Sandy told him and then went on to say, I sat with him for a while and as he warmed up, he began to come out of his meditative state and then entered a delirious state that deeply concerned me. Ian said, Sir Malcolm went on to incoherently babble and become increasingly restless as if he was battling all the demons of his life at once. After an hour or so of babbling, convulsing, and raising his arms, Sandy said he let out a big sigh and slipped away. His funeral is in London next week. Will I see you there? I replied, of course. But the words got caught in my throat as they came out and I fought back tears for a man I knew for only a brief period but that I had touched me. Ian added, I'll let Cheesy and Dick know. Dick's short on leave because of your long trip this summer. Ian was right, and only Cheesy could make it. At the funeral we met up with Sandy and had some time to speak to him. Apparently in the will of Sir Malcolm he had left his English estate to a Havelock on his father's side and let him carry on the title of Lord. There were many in India who had an impact on Sir Malcolm's life, so much of his estate was distributed amongst various monasteries, shrines, temples, and individuals. Sir Malcolm left Ian's father a large section of land adjacent to Windhaven that he purchased in 1965 when Ian's grandfather repurchased Windhaven. In addition, he left a small annual stipend to the Windhaven Labs plc. To Sandev he left his father's home in New Delhi, India and all of its contents, including sufficient incomes to maintain it in perpetuity. To Ian he left his own home in India under the same conditions. Ian had been to India as a child, but barely remembered Sir Malcolm's home, because there were so many beautiful estates in that part of the world if you're British. Right next door there could be some horrible places if you're Indian. Sir Malcolm was cremated, and his last wish was to have his ashes spread in a very specific location in India accompanied by a GPS location. Sandy asked if we would come to India next summer and attend to this task with him. There are many factors that can exert force on a pendulum to set it in motion. Sometimes the force is minor or even insignificant. If the motion is minor, then the swing is imperceptible to those who might not agree with the direction it's taking. Sometimes the force is major and significant. If the motion is major, then the swing is major to those who might not agree, and they will definitely push back, if they're capable and if they're willing. And of course, there is that one massive input of force that has been building up which can send the pendulum past its pivot with no opportunity for response. There is no other single factor, outside of nature, that can deliver that overwhelming force than insider knowledge. Insider knowledge provides momentum-built force released all at once like a dam bursting. It's like walking into a door for the outsider. People believe inside knowledge only refers to the stock market and is reserved for the Martha Stewarts of the world. If you have knowledge about a company and that knowledge is not accessible by the public, then you have insider knowledge. Consider a merger with your brother-in-law's company or the company getting a government contract from your Uncle Bob that will have a significant impact on the value of the company. You are said to be on the inside. Inside knowledge can be part of everyday life when you consider it simply having knowledge that someone else doesn't. When Cheesy counts cards they call it cheating because he knows the next card that's coming up. I think that's inside knowledge and they're just pissed off they aren't on the inside. When a police officer waits behind a tree at the bottom of a hill where they knows people accelerate, is that insider knowledge or entrapment? When a hunter drives prey towards a cliff, where they know the fall will kill them, is that insider knowledge or survival? When a student has the answer sheet for the exam, is that insider knowledge or cheating? Newton's first law tells us an object will not change its motion unless a force acts upon it. And that's how the apple got Newton's pendulums moving.